Good morning. I'd have a snappy comeback to Xander, but in all fairness, we're going away on vacation, and I won't be here in 2 weeks from today. So I know summers are so busy, and so we decided, well, let's move our vacation to spring. So this is kind of the first time for us to do our actual annual vacation during the school year and in the spring. So it just happens to be on the heels of our trip with the brothers. So I did ask Xander to preach again next week, but he stood me up. So I don't know if he has plans to be away. I know he's going on a cruise like the week after that. So I don't know. All these vacations are just crazy. Okay, let's get into it. We've been talking about this cycle of loving our neighbors. It's the second greatest commandment, to love your neighbors as yourself. It's found in Leviticus chapter 19, and it's all throughout the Bible. There are all kinds of rules and regulations for loving your neighbor, taking care of people around you, supplying their needs, and helping people in need. And then we want to move people to love God. We've got to teach them about God. Because if we're just loving our neighbors and we're doing things for them, that's just a humanitarian effort. Anybody can do that. But we want to point people to God and teach people who God is and have them fall in love with God, which is the greatest commandment, and it's the greatest thing that you can possibly do on planet Earth and the whole universe, is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then we need to move one another to serving others. This is not suggested in the Bible, this is commanded. And that's what today we're going to emphasize, the commandment to feed people who are hungry. This is a really big issue, believe it or not, even within our own country and our own community. This is not a third world problem. This is a worldwide problem. There are people hungry all over the place. And we're required to step in and to help them. Our theme this year is becoming the hands and feet of Jesus. How do we look like Jesus to other people? And not just look like him, how do we walk like him and serve like he did? To walk with his feet and to serve with his hands. And our theme verses come from Matthew 25, 37 through 40. Jesus said this. He was talking to his disciples, and he's talking to them about feeding people and clothing people. And they said, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. You serve other people, you feed other people, you clothe other people, you do it to Jesus himself. He said, to the extent that you do that to anybody else, you are doing it to me. Why is that important? Why is it important to feed people as if we're feeding Jesus? How many of you, and you don't have to raise your hand, I'll raise my hand. How many of you, and Jacob and Leah know the answer to this well, and Brent, God bless them, our benevolence committee. How many of us have gotten frustrated and looked down on people who are poor because we see the endless needs and the endless requests, and we get compassion fatigue. We look down on them, right? You don't have to raise your hands, but we do. It's human nature to look down on people, especially when you factor into drug use and things like that, where people are making bad decisions, bad money management. We look at those things, and people are coming begging for money and as they're smoking an $8 pack of cigarettes. And you're like, no. And we get really frustrated and short-tempered and impatient. And we tend to look down on people. And Jesus says, the way that you serve people who are in need is the way, it's as if you served me directly. And it changes our perspective. And we're still going to lose patience. I think Jesus lost patience sometimes. He got tired, obviously. He got exhausted and said, hey, disciples, like, we need to get away. We need rest. That's normal. That's okay. It's even okay to lose patience every now and then. But it's not okay to look down on people as a group collectively as if they're the problem. And that's what Jesus is combating. He's saying, no, you don't understand what leads somebody to poverty. There are a host of things that lead people into poverty. We just got a call. I got a call on Friday, and I literally missed it by like 15 minutes. I came into the office. There was a message, and a woman called, and she said, hey, I'm in one of the hotels, named the hotel. And she's like, it's a domestic violence situation, which I have a heart for. It's one of the worst things when somebody's being beaten by their spouse and they wind up getting kicked out, oftentimes in abusive situations like that. In fact, almost always. They're not only abusing physically and verbally, but they also abuse financially. They make it to where if you walk out that door, if you walk away from me, I will guarantee that you will never make it on your own. They control all the money. I see it all the time. And so here was somebody who was part of that domestic situation and is now homeless, and she sounded very desperate. And a lot of times you can tell just by listening to messages, you can kind of tell after doing it for years who's sincere and who isn't. And it was a plea saying, as of 11 o'clock, I'm out on the streets. I have nobody to turn to. Please help. I called the number, and unfortunately, and it happens very often, goes straight to voicemail. There is no voicemail. The number you've reached cannot accept voicemails. It happens all the time. Phones are typically, they're like the phones that you add minutes. They don't have money. They don't add minutes to the phone. They make a phone call, and a lot of times that's the last phone call that they can make. I thought about her all weekend. It's cold, isn't it? The temperature absolutely bottomed out starting on Friday, not long after I got that phone call. We get desperate messages like this all the time, right here in our own community. And we do the best that we can here. We have an incredible benevolence team. I really depend on these guys. But we can't help everybody. And Jesus is talking specifically in the verses that we're going to cover about feeding people and taking care of people who are hungry. We don't know what that's like. Most of us, if not all of us sitting here today, people online, live streaming, we don't know what it is to feel desperation where you don't know, if you don't get your next meal, you're digging in a dumpster. Most of us have not dug in dumpsters to get our next meal. But I did a demographic of Somerset County, and I just wanted to know. I was like, what is the hunger disparity in Somerset County? And it's pretty bad. It ranks, somewhere around the national average, which is not great. But you know who it affects the most? Young kids, you'll appreciate this. Kids. Young children are by far the hungriest people in this nation. They're the ones who do not get food. A lot of times that's being in family situations where mom and dad are on drugs or mom and dad are just not good with money and the kids don't get fed. They're kind of an afterthought. Children are the hungriest people in Somerset County. Children are the hungriest people in the nation, and children are the hungriest people worldwide. That means that when you go to school, young kids, you look around, quite a few people who you're sitting with in your class have not eaten for the day. Quite a few people who you sit with cannot afford lunch plans. And they'll go home and they won't be fed. Right here in Somerset County, I've looked at the numbers. I've looked at official websites. I've looked at quite a lot of research within our area. And that's with food banks. We have food banks that are here. We have the one at the Lutheran Church right across from Natalie's daycare. We have, Natalie has a food program at the daycare center. Even with these programs, we have people who are struggling right here in this own town. So here's what James says. James, the brother of Jesus, says, "What good is it, my brothers, if somebody says he has faith, but he does not have works? Can that faith save him?" That's a good question. If I have faith, and I've met people, there was a guy, I've mentioned this before, it's been a long time, but there was a guy in one of my Bible classes at Harding that literally, in his jeans on his right knee, it was worn out. Every pair of jeans that he owned, there was a big hole on his right hand knee. Every single class that I ever had with him, didn't matter if it was math or Bible or whatever it was, every single class, at the beginning of class, he would get down on his right knee, he would fold his hands, and he would pray. And Jesus says, and I looked at him with tremendous respect. I was like, man, this dude has, I wish I had a fraction of the faith that he had. He was unashamedly praying in front of everybody and not for show. He legitimately would pray for people and with people. James says, if you have all this faith, but you don't have works, can that faith save you? It's a kind of a rhetorical question. He goes on, and he says this: if a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, be warm and filled," without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? So also, faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. In other words, no, that faith cannot save you. If you're sending people on the way or just telling them that you're praying for them and you know that they have needs and you're not stepping in and actually doing something about it, your faith, James says, the brother of Jesus, your faith is dead. This ought to make us lose sleep at night. In Deuteronomy, and this is not a new idea, this is from the beginning of time, God commands his people to care for your neighbor, to feed them, to clothe them. People fall into poverty for a whole host of reasons. And here's what God commands in Deuteronomy 15. He says, if among you one of your brothers should become poor in any of your towns within your land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother. In other words, don't get close-fisted and fail to give them food or money or clothes or whatever it is. Don't harden your heart and don't shut your hand against your poor brother, but you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his need, whatever it may be. I don't know about you, but I struggle with this one. And again, our benevolence team knows because I'm very open with them. And I'm like, I get so frustrated. I'm like, it's just endless needs. They never stop. And the mismanagement of money and and it's so easy to look down on people and get frustrated with them. And there's always that fine line. And I think that's fair between enabling somebody and helping somebody. And we have to make judgment calls all the time. And they're not easy judgment calls. Sometimes people wind up out on the street in the cold because we make a judgment call and we're like, we can't do it right now. These are not easy calls. And by the way, pray for our benevolence committee. There are not easy decisions ever that are being made at this congregation. These are tough decisions that have to be made. We don't have an endless amount of money. We're not a piggy bank. We just don't have an endless amount of money that we can help people. We've got to partner with other organizations and other churches. But it's the heart of what we're doing. And he says, when you come into this land, God says, when I'm giving you this land, if one of your brothers becomes poor, don't harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother. Open your hand to him, lend him sufficient need, whatever it may be. Take care lest there be an unworthy thought in your heart. And you say, the 7th year, the year of release is near, and your eye look grudgingly on your poor brother, and you give him nothing, and he cried to the Lord against you, and you be guilty of sin. Every 7 years, the Israelites were released from owing payment. And he's saying, don't ride that out and wait till the very bitter end, and then be like, oh, look, it's the 7th year. Oh, look at the time, right? It's letting the clock run out. Not speeding it up, Xander. Letting the clock run out. And people were doing it, and God says, do not do that. Don't ride the clock out and say, oh, it's the 7th year. I don't owe poor people anything. Because you're sinning when you do that. Instead, you shall give to him freely, and your heart shall not be begrudging when you give to him. Because for this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and all that you undertake. For there will never cease to be poor in the land. Remember when Jesus said this? You will always have the poor among you. He's quoting from Deuteronomy 15:11. There are always going to be poor people, no matter what the economy is doing, no matter how many tax breaks there are, no matter how many welfare programs in place, there are always going to be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy, and to the poor in your land. You do this, and God says, I will bless you. And not only that, if you're not doing this, your faith it's dead. It's useless. We sung the song right before the sermon time, And Can It Be? And I love the words of that song. This amazing love that God gave himself for you. He bled out for you. And I love the 3rd verse in that. Boldly I come before your throne. I come boldly before your throne because I know that you are a God who sacrificed yourself because you loved us that much. And the whole point of that is, the whole point of God sacrificing his son is, all right, what will you do with that? You've been given grace. You've been saved. You've been given grace. What will you do with that for other people? For people who are hurting, for people who are desperate? Will you tell them about God? Will you take care of their needs? Will you feed them? Will you clothe them? Will you sit with them? Will you pray with them? What will you do with that sacrifice? And we talked about it in class this morning. What separates Christianity from every other religion that has ever existed is that other religions, pagan religions, you had to appease the gods. You had to satisfy them. You had to work to pleasure the gods so that they might find favor on you. In Christianity, we don't have to do all these things to get the attention of God and to please him. Instead, God says, do righteousness. Walk with me. Walk in step with my Spirit that I've given you. And you'll be blessed. We don't have to pretend. We don't have to play church to please God. We don't have to get his attention. God gives us his grace freely. He gave us his Son freely. And God says, because I've given you my grace, walk the way that my Son walked. Walk the way, teach people and reach people and sit with people and pray with people the way that my Son did. Because he loved them so much that he literally died for them. And so as you go out this week, pray that God puts somebody in your life. Whether you're young or old, doesn't matter. Pray that God puts somebody in your life that you see people who are struggling that you're able to help. And sometimes we have to step outside of our own zone and actually pick up the phone. And I'm like, what if we called a school and said, hey, like we have, Brenda started this a while ago, the table in the basement. We have hats and gloves and things like that are really nice. What if we called the principals of the elementary schools? We have Josh Spangler at Maple Ridge. We have Mr. Kashadi at Eagle View. What if we called them and said, hey, what's the need there for kids with clothing? We're not out of the cold season yet. What if we did things like that, where we actively engaged people and we gave? You kids can do the same thing. Show up to school and ask your principals or ask your teachers, like, do you guys know of any needs within the school? We have to communicate. We have to be willing to communicate. We can't just expect to show up to church, play church, and then God's like, a job well done. We've got to engage our community. So I want to encourage you this week to go out and do that. Be moved by compassion and by love, and I think we can make this world and this community a much brighter place, and God will bless that. If there's anybody this morning who's not yet taken that step to put Christ on in baptism, or if you have prayer needs, I'd encourage you to come up as we all stand and sing this song together. Eric.